In 1857, peculiar events unfolded on the Mississippi River, stretching from Memphis to Vicksburg. Incidents that steamboat captains were hesitant to attribute to natural causes. From April to June, 3 vessels reported encounters with what was described as an enormous black hand, emerging from the murky depths to grasp at their hulls. While official reports from the Mississippi and Ohio Steamboat Company noted damage of an unknown origin, privately, captains recounted a more unsettling narrative. Records indicate that following the third occurrence, rivermen began to skirt a particular section of the river, branding it as cursed. These happenings coincided with extraordinarily low water levels, a consequence of a parched spring, which laid bare sandbars and submerged hazards that had been concealed for decades. Elders whispered that the river had revealed secrets best left buried. By late summer, river traffic in this area had almost ceased, leading to considerable financial losses for the steamboat company. The precise nature of these riverine events remains a subject of speculation, yet the captain's testimonies shared chillingly consistent details. The saga commenced on April 19, 1857, when the steamboat River Queen, under the command of Captain Ezra Holloway, embarked on its routine journey from Memphis to Natchez, laden with cotton and tobacco. This vessel was a typical mid-sized paddle steamer, approximately 50 meters in length, featuring 2 passenger decks and a cargo hold. With 23 years of experience on the river, Holloway was intimately familiar with every twist, every shore, and every perilous current along hundreds of miles of the waterway. The weather was clear and remarkably still, an auspicious sign for April. The river flowed serenely, its murky brown surface reflecting the gentle spring sun. The water level was diminished after a dry March, exposing sandbars and banks usually submerged by floodwaters. Dense stands of willows and poplars lined the banks, occasionally punctuated by plantations where cotton fields were being prepared for the upcoming season. On board were 28 passengers, predominantly merchants and planters traveling for business. The crew comprised 13 men, the captain, 2 mates, an engineer, a stoker, 6 sailors, and 2 stewards. Holloway navigated the vessel with the assuredness of a seasoned riverboat captain, diligently staying within the main channel and bypassing shallower areas. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the River Queen entered a vast bend roughly 60 miles upstream from Vicksburg. This part of the river was infamous for its deceptive currents and shifting sandbars, which reconfigured after every flood. Holloway ordered a reduction in speed and stationed a lookout at the bow to measure the depth. The sailor cast the lead line, calling out the measurements, which were relayed to the bridge. The first peculiar incident occurred without warning. As the ship sailed steadily down the center of the channel, a dull impact resonated along the port side, as if the steamer had struck a submerged log. Such collisions were common on the Mississippi, where the river carried numerous sunken logs and snags. Holloway ordered a hull inspection for leaks, but no damage was found. The sailors reported a glancing blow, as if something had scraped along the hull rather than directly hitting it. Assistant Captain Joshua Mayberry, a 28-year-old with 7 years of river experience, theorized it might have been a submerged tree snagged on the riverbed. Holloway concurred with this assessment and instructed the ship to proceed, maintaining vigilance. 15 minutes later, the impact recurred, this time more forcefully and prolonged. The steamer vibrated throughout its length. Shouts erupted from the engine room, and passengers on deck grew visibly agitated. Holloway immediately ordered the engines stopped and stepped onto the bridge wing to observe the river around the ship. The water flowed calmly, devoid of any discernible currents or eddies. The surface remained undisturbed, save for a gentle ripple from a light breeze. Holloway detected no floating logs or other impediments. The bow lookout signaled clear visibility and ample depth for passage. Nevertheless, an indefinable unease gnawed at the seasoned captain. He sensed a vague disquiet that defied logical explanation. Engineer Thomas Griffith, a heavily built man in his 40s, with a sun-weathered face and hands marked by years of working with hot metal, approached the bridge. He reported that the port-side paddle wheel had encountered unusual resistance, as if snagged on something underwater. The steam pressure briefly faltered, before recovering as the resistance vanished. Griffith added that in 20 years on riverboats, he had never experienced anything similar. Usually, paddles merely struck and rebounded, but this felt as though something had gripped the wheel before deliberately releasing it. Holloway ordered the ship to resume at a reduced speed, instructing the crew to remain highly alert. Passengers were reassured that the situation was under control, although some demanded explanations and voiced their displeasure. Among the passengers was Reverend Silas Connor, a 50-year-old Methodist preacher en route to his parish in Natchez. He approached the captain, inquiring if they should dock for an inspection. Holloway responded that the nearest pier was 2 hours away, and that an unnecessary stop at an undeveloped shore would be unwise. The sun slowly descended towards the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The river took on a dark bronze sheen, almost impervious to sight. As evening approached, the temperature began to drop, and a light mist rose from the water, typical of spring twilight on the Mississippi. The third jolt struck at sunset. This time, it was so intense that passengers on the upper deck lost their footing, some tumbling down. Sounds of metallic grinding and crew shouts emanated from the engine room. Holloway felt the ship list to the left, as if an immense force were pressing against its side. He dashed from the wheelhouse to the port side, peering into the murky water. What he witnessed sent a shiver down his spine. Rising about 2 feet out of the water was something resembling a colossal black arm or limb, covered in what appeared to be wet bark or scales. The limb was as thick as a barrel and extended for about 10 feet along the ship's side. At its extremity were vaguely formed digits or claws, which this entity used to cling to the steamer's hull. Holloway froze, disbelief clouding his mind. The limb slowly scraped along the side, leaving deep furrows in the wooden planking. Its movement was deliberate, controlled, as though something submerged was meticulously surveying the ship. The captain yearned to shout, to instruct the crew, but his voice was trapped in his throat. Mayberry rushed to the captain's side, witnessed the same spectacle, and blanched. He clutched the captain's sleeve, croaking a question about its nature, but Holloway was speechless. Several passengers on the upper deck also noticed the limb and began to shriek. Women screamed, men recoiled from the railing. The limb then began to recede back into the water as slowly as it had materialized. The surrounding water churned and frothed, darkening further. Within seconds, it vanished completely beneath the surface, leaving only ripples. The steamer righted itself, and the resistance on the paddle wheel ceased. Holloway immediately ordered full speed ahead. Engineer Griffith pushed the boilers to maximum pressure, risking overheating, but the captain insisted on speed. The steamer accelerated, its paddle wheels churning the water into white foam, and a black column of smoke billowed from the funnel. Passengers congregated on the decks, their gazes fixed on the water, anticipating another emergence. For the subsequent 2 hours, the River Queen traveled at the highest speed the boilers could sustain. Holloway remained on the bridge, scrutinizing the deepening gloom of the river. The banks slowly receded. The fog intensified, enshrouding the water in a white veil. The crew worked in hushed silence, only essential commands breaking the quiet. The steamer eventually reached a small pier near the town of Greenville, after complete darkness had fallen. Holloway immediately commanded the ship to dock, despite being several hours away from its final destination. Passengers disembarked with palpable relief, many vowing never to traverse that section of the river again. Some demanded refunds for their tickets, threatening to lodge complaints with the steamboat company's office. After the passengers had departed, Holloway assembled the crew on deck to inspect the damage by lantern light. Deep gashes, roughly 15 feet long, were discovered on the port side, gouged into the wooden planking. The scratches ran parallel to each other, spaced about a foot apart, as if rendered by gigantic claws. The wood was not merely scratched, but torn away, leaving deep furrows, some as deep as an inch. Several planks of the sheathing were cracked and required replacement. The ship's carpenter, an elderly German named Werner Schmidt, who had served on the river for over 30 years, examined the damage and shook his head. He declared he had never before witnessed such markings. Floating debris left dents or impact holes, but not parallel grooves extending the ship's length. He added that the force required to inflict such damage must have been immense, surpassing anything he had encountered in his long career. Holloway dispatched a telegram to the steamboat company's office in Memphis, describing the incident in cautious terms. He reported a collision with an unidentified large underwater object and damage necessitating repairs. However, he deliberately omitted what he had personally observed, fearing he would be dismissed as unbalanced or inebriated. That evening, the crew gathered in the lower deck wardroom, their hushed voices full of trepidation. Jacob Wells, a senior sailor from Louisiana with Creole roots, recounted an old riverman's legend from his youth. He spoke of an ancient entity dwelling in the Mississippi, revered by local tribes as a water spirit. This creature, he explained, would surface during periods of low water when its lair was exposed, attacking vessels that trespassed its domain. Wells added that the elders of the Choctaw tribe spoke of sacrifices made to appease this river spirit. Mayberry abruptly dismissed the tale as mere superstition and old wives' stories. He posited that their encounter involved something natural, perhaps an exceptionally large alligator or a colossal river catfish, known to reach over 10 feet in length and weigh hundreds of pounds in the Mississippi. He suggested they might have disturbed a particularly enormous specimen. Holloway, however, remained silent, his gaze fixed on the dim flicker of the kerosene lamp. He had witnessed something that defied categorization as a fish or a reptile. The sheer size of the appendage surpassed anything known to inhabit the river, and its movements were too deliberate, too intentional for an animal acting purely on instinct. The repairs to the River Queen spanned 3 days. Carpenter Schmidt replaced the damaged planks, recalked the seams, and coated the hull with fresh resin. During this time, Holloway questioned local residents and other captains at the dock. None reported similar incidents in recent years, though an elderly helmsman from a cargo barge recalled hearing tales of strange occurrences in that particular stretch of the river during the previous century, when traffic was significantly lighter. On April 23rd, the River Queen commenced her return journey to Memphis. Holloway instructed the crew to hug the right bank, avoiding the central channel where the incident had taken place. The voyage proceeded without incident, though a palpable tension permeated the crew throughout. Captain Holloway submitted a detailed report of the occurrence to the steamship company's office. The directors listened to his account with skepticism, yet could not dismiss the physical damage to the ship and the testimonies of the passengers. Several travelers, including Reverend Connor, corroborated seeing a black limb gripping the steamer's side. The company decided to launch its own investigation and temporarily reroute its vessels, instructing captains to circumvent the problematic river section whenever feasible. However, 3 weeks later, on May 13, 1857, a second incident unfolded, far more dramatic than the first. The steamboat Southern Belle, under the command of Captain William Darcy, faced the same threat in the identical river section. Darcy, a seasoned captain known for his prudence and skill, had initially scoffed at Holloway's stories. He regarded the narrative of a river demon as a fabrication to excuse careless navigation. As the Southern Belle approached the treacherous bend, Darcy took no extra precautions, maintaining normal speed down the central channel. The weather, typical for May, was overcast with a light drizzle. Visibility remained good despite the clouds, and the river flowed calmly. 42 passengers and 16 crew members were aboard, along with a cargo of industrial goods and several head of cattle destined for downstream farmers. The assault was sudden and far more forceful than that experienced by the River Queen. Around noon, when the steamer was near the center of the hazardous area, two colossal black limbs erupted simultaneously from the water, one at the bow, the other closer to the stern on the port side. Both limbs were as thick as barrels, covered in a substance resembling wet bark or armor, encrusted with river silt and algae. They gripped the ship's side with such immense power that the wooden planking groaned and began to splinter. The steamer listed sharply to port, and water surged onto the lower deck through open portholes. Passengers shrieked, scrambling to move to the starboard side, creating a chaotic stampede. The cattle in the pens on the bow deck bellowed and thrashed against their enclosures. Darcy rushed to the bridge wing, confronting a horrifying scene. The limbs weren't merely clinging to the side, they were slowly, inexorably tightening their grip, as if intent on crushing the steamer's hull. The wood shrieked and moaned, with cracks proliferating across the planking. The water surrounding the limbs churned and frothed, turning dark brown from disturbed silt. Darcy bellowed orders to the engineer to reverse at full speed, hoping to wrench the vessel free. The paddle wheels began to churn backward, roiling the water, but the steamer remained immobile. The limbs held it with incredible tenacity. The ship began to slowly sink bow first, water already inundating the bow deck. The first mate seized a hunting rifle, kept in the wheelhouse for protection against river pirates, loaded it, and fired at point-blank range into the nearest limb. The bullet struck the black surface and ricocheted off without any discernible damage. The limb didn't even flinch, continuing its relentless pressure. Several sailors, armed with axes and hooks, rushed to the side, hacking at the limb holding the stern. The axe blows landed with a dull thud, as if striking stone or thick leather. The blades left only superficial cuts, from which no blood or fluid seeped. The limb's surface was astonishingly hard, almost like wood covered in silt and a hardened resin-like substance. Darcy made a crucial decision that saved the ship. He ordered the steam valves opened, directing jets of boiling steam at the limbs. Engineer Walter Bish, a seasoned professional, instantly grasped the plan and swiftly opened the emergency valves. White clouds of superheated steam, under immense pressure, burst from the pipes and enveloped the limbs. The reaction was immediate. The limbs convulsed and began to relax their grip. The water around them frothed more violently, and large bubbles rose to the surface, suggesting a colossal movement beneath. The limbs began to recede, sliding down the ship's side. Deep gouges and indentations marked the hull where they had been attached. Within moments, both limbs vanished beneath the water, leaving only murky foam and ripples. The steamer suddenly righted itself, nearly flinging the deck occupants in the opposite direction. Darcy immediately commanded full speed ahead. The engine roared, the paddle wheels churned the water into white foam, and the steamer surged forward, leaving a frothy wake. The crew and passengers intently watched the water astern, anticipating another attack. Some claim to have glimpsed a massive dark mass moving parallel to the steamer in the murky depths, though this remained unconfirmed. The Southern Belle maintained maximum speed for approximately an hour until it had safely exited the dangerous zone. An inspection revealed severe damage. Several planks on the port side were shattered or cracked. 2 frames were bent, and a slow leak had appeared in the hold, requiring constant pumping. The decks were a chaotic mess of fallen crates, broken dishes, and overturned furniture. Several passengers sustained bruises and abrasions from falls, and one elderly woman suffered a broken arm. Darcy brought the ship to the nearest pier and immediately dispatched an urgent telegram to the steamship company's office. His message was far more direct than Holloway's report. Darcy explicitly detailed the attack by an unknown, enormous creature inhabiting a specific area of the river. He insisted on an immediate alteration of all company ship routes and warned other shipping lines of the peril. The telegram created an uproar at the company's office. The directors could not disregard this second incident, especially given the extensive damage and the multiple passenger testimonies. An emergency meeting was convened, inviting both Captains Holloway and Darcy, as well as representatives from other steamship companies operating on the Mississippi. The meeting took place on May 22nd at the company's office in Memphis. Holloway and Darcy meticulously recounted their encounters with the unknown creature. Their narratives revealed striking similarities. Immense black limbs covered in hard bark or armor, incredible strength, and purposeful movements. Both captains were seasoned and eloquent speakers with impeccable reputations, teetotalers, and individuals of sound mind. Representatives from other companies reacted with mixed feelings. Some openly expressed skepticism, suggesting collective hallucination or an exaggeration of ordinary encounters with submerged objects. Others, particularly older captains with decades of river experience, listened with grave attention. One veteran captain, Isaiah Markham, who had plied the Mississippi for over 40 years, recalled that early in his career, old rivermen spoke of strange occurrences in that very area. It was decided to dispatch a special expedition to investigate the troublesome section of the river. The steamship company organized the expedition with the assistance of local authorities, planning to use a small, shallow draft vessel equipped with dredges to explore the riverbed, accompanied by a team of experienced rivermen and observers. While the expedition was being prepared, steamship companies temporarily adjusted their routes, diverting ships through alternative river branches whenever possible. Though some captains persisted in their journeys, dismissing the warnings as needless alarm, the treacherous river stretch saw a marked decrease in traffic. Then, on June 1, 1857, the third and most tragic event unfolded. Captain Henry Larkin, at the helm of the small passenger steamboat Mississippi Star, disregarded the cautionary advisories and navigated his vessel into the perilous bend. Aboard were 38 passengers, including several children, along with 12 crew members. Larkin, a youthful captain who had assumed command just months prior, scoffed at tales of a river demon, believing them to be fabrications concocted by rival companies to tarnish his employer's reputation. He often boasted in waterfront taverns that he feared no aquatic spirits and would traverse the hazardous section at full speed, thus debunking any purported threats. The attack transpired in broad daylight, under a clear sky with excellent visibility. Survivors recounted how not 2, but 4 immense appendages simultaneously erupted from the water, enveloping the steamboat on all sides. They gripped the vessel's hull with such force that the wooden planks began to shatter almost instantly. The ship listed so severely that torrents of water cascaded onto the decks. Larkin's command disintegrated almost immediately. Panicked passengers surged to the starboard side, exacerbating the tilt, and several were flung into the churning river. The crew struggled to obey orders, but the pandemonium was overwhelming. The engineer had barely begun to power up the engines when the hull started to rend and splinter. Methodically and relentlessly, the hull was crushed, its frames snapping like brittle twigs. The cacophony of splintering wood mingled with human cries. The steamboat rapidly submerged, water inundating the hold and lower decks. The boilers, engulfed by the cold river water, detonated with a deafening roar, spewing a cloud of steam and debris. Within 5 minutes, the ship had fractured and vanished beneath the surface. Survivors floated amidst the wreckage, clutching onto planks and crates. The colossal limbs vanished beneath the water as swiftly as the steamer sank, leaving only swirling eddies and bubbles on the surface. Another steamboat, trailing a few miles behind, heard the explosion and reached the disaster site roughly 30 minutes later. By then, only a debris field and a handful of survivors clinging to buoyant objects remained. The rescue operation spanned several hours. Among the 38 passengers and 12 crew members of the Mississippi Star, only 23 were saved. The rest either drowned or perished in the boiler explosions, including 4 children and Captain Larkin. News of the catastrophe swept across the Mississippi Valley within days. Newspapers sensationalized the event, with headlines proclaiming a river monster devouring steamboats. Survivors' detailed accounts, consistently mentioning massive black limbs emerging from the water, were published in every article. The public was gripped by fear and shock. The governor of Mississippi demanded an immediate investigation and swift action to ensure the safety of river navigation. The Army Corps of Engineers was tasked with probing the problematic river section and, if possible, neutralizing the source of the danger. A military expedition was assembled, comprising rivermen, engineers, and a small Army detachment. On June 8th, the expedition arrived at the perilous bend. 2 small armored boats, typically employed for anti-piracy and anti-smuggling patrols, were repurposed for the operation. Cannons were mounted on the boats, and armed soldiers were deployed. Their strategy involved using dredges to explore the riverbed and, upon discovering anything unusual, attempting to destroy it with artillery fire or explosive charges. The operation lasted 3 days. The dredges brought up typical silt, sand, snags, and submerged logs from the riverbed. However, in one location, an unusual formation was unearthed. Something resembling a colossal submerged tree, but with an exceptionally peculiar shape. Its wood was almost black, like coal, incredibly dense and heavy. When they attempted to hoist it to the surface, the dredger's cable snapped under the immense weight. On the evening of the 3rd day, as the boats prepared to halt work until morning, one of the limbs abruptly broke the surface. It appeared about 20 feet from the nearest boat, slowly rising from the water like a massive black column. Water streamed down its surface, revealing a hide akin to bark or armor, intricately scarred and encrusted with growths. The limb was even larger than captains had described, approximately 3 feet thick at its narrowest point. It ascended about 10 feet above the water's surface before slowly inclining toward the boat. The soldiers and boatmen stood transfixed, horrified by the nightmarish spectacle. Lieutenant James Cole, the expedition commander, was the first to regain his composure and bellowed the order to fire. Soldiers raised their rifles and unleashed a volley of shots at the limb. Bullets ricocheted off the tough exterior, leaving only shallow indentations. The bow gun on the boat discharged grape shot at close range. A barrage of metal balls assailed the limb, generating sparks and chipping off small fragments of its surface, yet inflicting no significant damage. The limb continued its slow descent toward the boat, now close enough for observers to discern its texture. The bark-like shell comprised numerous layers, similar to tree rings but far denser and harder. Small river crustaceans scuttled across its surface, and mollusks clung to it, suggesting an extended period underwater. Cole instructed the engineer to gun the engines to full power, and the boat lurched forward, pulling away from the limb. The second boat followed suit. The limb then slowly receded into the water, vanishing beneath the surface without a ripple. Both boats departed the dangerous bend at maximum speed and did not return. In his official report, Lieutenant Cole recounted the encounter with a large, unidentified object, possibly of biological origin. He recommended that this section of the river be closed to navigation until more extensive research could be undertaken and effective methods for addressing the threat could be developed. The Corps of Engineers concurred with his recommendations and issued an official warning to all vessels. Steamboat companies ceased using the perilous river section. Ships began rerouting through the western branch of the Mississippi, adding roughly 30 miles to their journey, but avoiding encounters with the mysterious creature. This resulted in significantly longer travel times and increased fuel expenses, but company owners deemed it an acceptable cost for the safety of passengers and cargo. By the end of June, steamboat traffic through the dangerous bend had virtually ceased. Only on rare occasions did desperate or reckless captains attempt the passage, gambling with their vessels and crews' lives to save time. Some succeeded, passing without incident and later boasting of their daring. However, a single failed attempt was enough to deter others from taking such risks. In the summer of 1857, following the rainy season, the Mississippi's water level began to rise. The sandbars exposed in spring were once again submerged. Rivermen hoped that whatever the creature was, it would retreat to deeper parts of the river or relocate entirely. Indeed, no new incidents occurred throughout the summer and fall. By winter, the legend of the Mississippi River demon had become ingrained in local folklore. Old men recounted tales in port taverns and on docks, embellishing them with new details. Captains who had personally encountered the creature generally avoided discussing it, weary of the disbelief and ridicule. Holloway abandoned his river career the following year, settling in a small Tennessee town. Darcy continued working on the river, but steered clear of the cursed bend for the remainder of his career. The official investigation yielded no definitive conclusions. In its final report, the Corps of Engineers cautiously acknowledged the presence of an unidentified large object in the river, possibly of biological origin, posing a hazard to navigation. It recommended avoiding this section of the river during low water levels and exercising extreme caution otherwise. Naturalists and scientists sought a rational explanation for the incidents. The most prevalent theory posited a gigantic river catfish or sturgeon, perhaps reaching an astonishing 30 feet in length. While exceptionally large specimens of these species were known to inhabit American rivers, there were no documented instances of such enormous catches. Some suggested that a colossal mass of tangled, submerged logs and snags, propelled by the current, created the illusion of a living creature. However, none of these theories adequately explained all the observed details. Multiple limbs acting in concert, purposeful and intelligent behavior, immense strength, and resilience to damage. Witnesses who saw the creature firsthand were convinced they had encountered something that defied categorization among known river inhabitants. The local Choctaw and Natchez Indians, a dwindling presence in the region, nodded gravely when informed of the incidents. Their elders spoke of white people disturbing the river's ancient slumber. They recounted legends of the Great Watcher, a water spirit that had dwelled in the Mississippi's deep pools since time immemorial. This spirit, they explained, awakens when the river reveals its lair and ferociously guards its territory from intrusion. The Indians had always shunned building villages near certain sacred and perilous spots on the river. In ensuing years, additional accounts of peculiar events surfaced in the identical river stretch, though none matched the spectacular nature of those in 1857. Captains cautioned newcomers, pinpointing the treacherous bend on charts and advising them to steer clear, particularly during low water periods. As river navigation advanced and steamboats grew in size, the peril gradually receded. Robust steel-hulled vessels, powered by potent engines, superseded the previous wooden steamboats. The river underwent more extensive exploration, with hazardous zones clearly marked on maps. Nevertheless, until the close of the 19th century, seasoned river workers continued to recount tales of the river demon that assailed steamboats in 1857, dispatching the Mississippi Star and numerous passengers to their watery graves. The remains of the sunken steamboat have never been retrieved. It rests somewhere at the river's bed, within the accursed bend, blanketed by silt and sand. Occasionally, in notably arid years when water levels plummet, local fishermen report glimpsing fragmented wood and metal protruding from the surface. Yet no one dares to venture too close, mindful of the ancient admonitions. The nature of the entity, if it truly existed, remains enigmatic. Perhaps it was a relic from prehistory, preserved in the Mississippi's profound depths. Perhaps it was a collective delusion, or a series of mishaps amplified by terrified onlookers. Or perhaps, as indigenous beliefs held, it was the spirit of the river itself, primeval and inscrutable, defending its territory from human intrusion. The Mississippi River perpetually channels its murky currents towards the Gulf of Mexico, harboring subsurface secrets that may forever stay concealed. Deep basins and neglected meanders preserve the recollection of an era when the world was younger, and the distinctions between the known and unknown were considerably less defined. The episodes of 1857 endure in the annals of river navigation as a stark reminder that even in the mid-19th century, an age of steam and iron, certain locations and phenomena defied logical explanation. Steamboat captains regularly exchanged narratives in port taverns, relaying warnings to subsequent generations of rivermen about places best avoided. The Mississippi's accursed bend persisted as one such location, denoted on charts with unofficial symbols and enveloped by an aura of peril and mystery. Contemporary researchers delving into the history of river navigation uncover accounts of these happenings in the archives of steamboat companies. The documentation corroborates the sinking of the Mississippi Star and damage sustained by other vessels. Reports of witness interrogations consistently present remarkably similar descriptions of the observed phenomena. A military expedition report, housed in Army archives, validates a collision with an unidentified object and the deployment of weaponry. Skeptics highlight the absence of physical evidence. No bodies, bones, or tissue samples from the creature. They attribute the events to sheer coincidence, mass hysteria, and the inherent unreliability of wooden steamboats of that period. Conversely, enthusiasts of the paranormal consider the 1857 occurrences among the most credibly documented cases of encounters with unknown entities in American history. The truth, as often tends to be the case, resides somewhere between these two extremes. Something undeniably transpired on the Mississippi during the spring and summer of 1857. 3 vessels confronted an unknown menace. One succumbed, claiming lives. Dozens of witnesses depicted enormous dark appendages emerging from the water. Experienced captains, individuals of sound mind and rational judgment, were so profoundly shaken that some abandoned their river careers. Was it an undiscovered biological species, an anomalous natural event, or something even more bizarre? We will likely never ascertain with certainty. The river guards its secrets, deep beneath layers of silt and water, far from prying eyes. And perhaps that is how it should be. Some enigmas are best left undisturbed. Some questions do not necessitate answers. Old-school rivermen, who have dedicated their lives to the Mississippi, understand that the river transcends a mere flow of water. It is a living entity, possessing its own distinct character, moods, and mysteries. They approach it with a reverence bordering on veneration, recognizing that humans on the river are perpetually guests, whose presence is tolerated but not always welcome. The legend of the 1857 river demon has become an integral part of the oral traditions of the Mississippi Valley. It is recounted to tourists on excursion steamboats, enshrined in collections of local folklore, and cited in books on the history of river navigation. With each retelling, it gains fresh nuances, some entirely fictitious. Yet, the core narrative remains constant. In the spring and summer of 1857, an event occurred on the Mississippi that steamboat captains could not, and would not, explain within the confines of usual experience. For those who embrace the existence of the unknown in our world, the narrative serves as a reminder that even thoroughly explored and familiar locales can shelter secrets. For skeptics, it exemplifies how fear and a dearth of information can give rise to legends from a series of accidents. But for rivermen, who dedicate their lives to the water, It is merely another chapter in the protracted history of their perilous and unpredictable profession. The river continues its ceaseless flow, as it has for millennia before these events, and as it will for centuries to come. The Mississippi's turbid currents carry silt, sand, and secrets to the sea, oblivious to human attempts to comprehend and elucidate everything that transpires. And somewhere in the profound depths near that bend, which rivermen shunned a century and a half ago, something ancient and patient may still lie in wait, anticipating the river's next low ebb to unveil its lair. Captains of modern tugs and barges traversing that section in the 21st century occasionally report peculiar hull vibrations or inexplicable resistance to the current in specific spots. They dismiss it lightheartedly, attributing it to the riverbed's idiosyncrasies or their imaginations. Yet, on particularly dark nights, when a dense fog blankets the water, even the most skeptical among them experience a faint unease as they navigate that bend. And this may be a judicious sensation, for the river remembers, and what resides in its depths remembers too. The events of 1857 imparted a cautionary tale to generations of rivermen. Not all river locations are safe. Not everything within the water can be comprehended. At times, opting for a 30-mile bypass is preferable to facing the perils that lurk in the profound depths of the watery expanses.